Welcome back to Fencing Family. Today we're going to be looking at how fencing can actually change your brain.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff.
We're not just talking about like strategy and reflexes here, but like actual physical changes happening.
Right.
So I was reading this research article called Mapping Brain Structure and Function in Professional Fencers,
Uh-huh.
and also this blog post from Fortune Fencing about neuromotor development in young fencers. They both had some really interesting stuff to say.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they first hear about this, they think, okay, years of training, especially with fencing's asymmetrical movements, that's
Well,
got to lead to like noticeable differences in the brain structure compared to like people who don't play sports.
totally. Yeah.
But actually, the research found that wasn't the case.
Oh, wow.
No difference in gray matter volume or the architecture of the white matter pathways.
Huh. Yeah, that is surprising.
Yeah.
I would have thought like all that intense practice,
Yeah.
could reshape the brain almost like bulking up a muscle or something.
Right? Like you'd be able to see it on a scan.
Exactly. So if it's not about size, then what is going on?
Well, that's where it gets really cool.
Okay.
Instead of structural changes, the research focused on functional changes.
Right.
Basically, how different parts of the brain light up and connect when fencers are doing specific tasks.
So how do they even measure that?
They use fMRI scans to observe this, and it's pretty amazing what they found.
So they're putting fencers and non-fencers in that giant donut-shaped scanner
Yep.
and having them do coordination tasks. I got to say, even reading about it made me kind of dizzy. Can you break down what those tasks actually involve?
Sure. So one task involved moving both hands in opposite directions.
Okay.
Another was moving the right hand and foot in the same direction, and the last one was moving the right hand and foot in opposite directions.
Gotcha. So basically like trying to pat your head and rub your belly at the same time, but inside a giant brain scanner?
Pretty much.
So what did the scans actually show about how fencers' brains were working compared to the non-fencers?
Okay, so in that first task, moving both hands in opposite directions, fencers showed increased activity in the basal ganglia.
Basal ganglia.
Yeah, it's like a filter for movement in your brain.
Okay.
Helps select the right moves and suppress the wrong ones.
Interesting.
And at the same time, there was less activity in areas that are usually associated with attention and spatial processing.
So does that mean like fencers are better at multitasking or coordinating movements without needing to overthink it?
Yeah, you could say that.
Like their brains are just wired for faster, more automatic responses.
Exactly. They're able to just execute the correct movement quickly and efficiently without relying as heavily on conscious effort.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's like their brains have become fine-tuned for this specific type of coordination.
So cool. What about the other tasks? Did they show similar patterns?
Well, in the task where the right hand and foot move together, fencers showed more activity in an area of the brain that's associated with like higher level planning of movements
Okay.
and less activity in the cerebellum, which is normally crucial for learning new motor skills.
Weight less activity where you learn movements.
Hmm.
But fencing has so many like complex actions. Does that mean fencers aren't learning as much?
No, not at all. What it suggests is that for fencers, this particular movement has become so ingrained
Okay.
that it's no longer a basic skill that they're actively learning.
Gotcha.
It's more like a pre-programmed action, a well-established plan their brains can execute without even thinking about it.
So it's kind of like walking. You don't have to think about each step anymore.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Now, what about that last task, moving the hand and foot in opposite directions?
Well, this one was kind of surprising.
Oh,
There were no significant differences between the fencers and the control group for this task. And we think this might be because this specific movement pattern isn't as commonly practiced in fencing training.
okay.
So like fencers practice lunges all the time,
Right.
which are movements where the hand and foot move together.
Yeah.
So this result really highlights how specific training can lead to very targeted adaptations in the brain.
That is so cool. Okay, so we've got all this brain scan data showing how fencers' brains are working differently. But how does this connect to real-world training? That's where the Fortune Sensing blog post comes in, right?
Right. They talk a lot about neuromotor development,
Yeah.
which are things like balance, coordination, reaction, speed,
Uh,
all crucial in fencing, but also just important for overall physical development, especially for young people.
of course.
And what's really interesting is that the Fortune Fencing blog emphasizes building these core skills before focusing on specific fencing techniques.
Okay.
They have this progressive training framework based on that principle.
Before we get into that, though, I want to take a quick moment to remind our listeners about our fantastic sponsor, Fencing Family. If you're looking for comfortable and stylish fencing apparel and accessories, look no further than Fencing Family's Etsy shop.
They've got it all.
They're based right here in Los Angeles, and they've got everything a fencer could want to show off their passion for the sport, both on and off the paste. Check them out at fencingfamily.etsy.com.
Awesome.
All right, now going back to Fortune Fencing's approach, I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, me too.
They're not just throwing kids into complex fencing drills right away.
Right.
They're building that solid foundation first. You need that strong base.
Makes sense.
And speaking of foundations, the Fortune Fencing blog actually cites research that supports their approach. They mention a study that found that fencing can actually boost the connections between brain cells in areas that are responsible for controlling movement.
That's incredible.
Isn't that cool? And another study cited in the blog post found that consistent fencing training can reduce the difference in skill between a fencer's dominant and non-dominant hand and arm.
So it's like fencing is training both sides of your brain to work together more effectively.
It's about improving your overall coordination and motor skills, even off the strip.
That's pretty remarkable.
It really is. But what about people who start fencing later in life? Can they still benefit from these neurological changes?
That's a great question. And while most of the research has focused on young athletes,
Yeah.
the principles likely apply to adults as well.
So even if you didn't, grow up fencing, you can still rewire your brain for better coordination and movement.
It really highlights the incredible, plasticity of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Its ability to adapt and change throughout life.
Totally. And you mentioned earlier how kids are spending more and more time in front of screens these days.
Right.
I mean, that's got to have a negative impact on their neuromotor development.
It's a big concern, for sure. Kids need to move, explore, and challenge their bodies and brains.
For sure. And that's where activities like fencing can be so beneficial.
Fencing provides that kind of structured and engaging environment
Yeah.
that really encourages those crucial neuromotor skills to develop.
It's about challenging your brain and body in a way that promotes healthy development.
Exactly.
You know, one thing that's always struck me about fencing
Yeah.
is how much it demands from you mentally.
Oh, for sure.
It's not just about being physically fit.
Uh-huh.
It's about strategy, split-second decision-making,
Right.
and being able to outsmart your opponent.
Absolutely. Fencing is like the perfect example of how physical and cognitive skills are intertwined. It's
Yeah.
a full brain workout. I think that's part of what makes it so beneficial for neurological development.
Makes sense?
The fact that fencers showed enhanced activity in areas associated with motor control and planning,
Right.
it suggests that their brains are becoming more efficient at processing information and making decisions related to movement.
So basically, they're better at anticipating their opponent's action, choosing the right attack or parry, executing those movements with precision and speed.
It's like their brains are operating on a higher level. Yeah.
And that higher level processing isn't limited to fencing, right?
Right.
I mean, those enhanced cognitive skills can translate to other areas of life,
Absolutely.
like problem solving, decision making, even multitasking.
Totally.
It makes me wonder if there are other activities out there that could have a similar or even more impactful effect on the brain.
That's a fascinating question, and I think it's one that researchers are actively exploring.
Yeah.
I mean, we've only scratched the surface of understanding the complex relationship between our activities and our brain development.
It makes you realize we have so much power to shape our own brain, not just through what we learn, but through how we move and challenge ourselves physically.
Precisely. We're not just passive recipients of our genetic blueprint. We have the ability to influence the structure and function of our brains through our actions and experiences.
That's a powerful thought. So what are some of those other activities then that might hold similar brain-boosting potential? What's out there beyond fencing?
Well, think about activities that demand that combination of physical coordination, mental focus, strategic thinking.
Okay.
Things like dance martial arts, even playing a musical instrument.
Yeah, I can see how those would all engage different parts of the brain
Right.
and require a high level of coordination and precision.
It's like cross-training for your brain.
I love that. And the beauty of it is there's something out there for everyone. Whether you're drawn to the grace of dance, the discipline of martial arts, or the creative expression of music,
Mhm.
there are countless ways to challenge your brain and body in ways that promote growth and development.
And even if you're not into those specific activities,
Yeah.
there are plenty of other options that can benefit your brain.
Like what?
Things like walking, gardening,
Okay.
playing games with friends.
Right.
I mean, all those things can have positive effects on brain health.
The key is to just stay active, engaged, and open to new experiences. Anything that gets you moving, thinking, and learning is good for your brain.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This conversation has been so eye-opening. It's amazing to think that we have the power to shape our own brains through the activities we choose.
I know, it's pretty cool.
I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to get out there and try something new to challenge themselves
Yeah,
and to discover the incredible potential that lies within.
I couldn't agree more. And remember, it's never too late to start.
Right.
The brain is incredibly adaptable, and it's always ready to learn and grow.
So let's wrap things up with a quick recap of what we've learned from our deep dive into fencing and the brain. We started with this surprising finding that while fencing doesn't necessarily change the structure of your brain, it does have a significant impact on its function.
Right. And we saw how those functional changes translate to real-world benefits for fencers,
Yeah.
like enhanced motor control, faster reaction times, and better decision-making abilities.
Absolutely. We also discussed how the principles behind these neurological changes can apply to other activities.
Yes.
And how important it is to stay active and engaged throughout life.
Couldn't agree more.
We also explored how the training methods used by organizations like fortune fencing, with their focus on building those core neuromotor skills first, are backed by scientific research.
Yeah. It's exciting to see how organizations are using a scientific approach to improve their training methods and help athletes reach their full potential.
And speaking of potential, we ended our discussion with this thought-provoking question.
What was that?
What other activities out there might hold the key to unlocking even greater brain power?
Ooh, good one.
It's a question worth pondering.
It is. There's a whole world of possibilities waiting to be explored, and each new discovery brings us one step closer to understanding the amazing capabilities of the human brain.
Now, before we sign off, I want to remind our listeners to check out the full research article titled Mapping Brain Structure and Function in Professional Fencers by Cordani et al.
Yes.
And the insightful blog post from Fortune Fencing titled Neuromotor Development in Young Fencers, a Scientific Approach at Fortune Fencing on their website.
Those are really interesting if you want to dive deeper into all the details.
Yeah, definitely worth checking out.
Especially if you're a bit of a science nerd.
So even if you don't read the whole thing, I hope this deep dive has at least given you a new perspective on fencing.
I think so.
It's more than just physical skill.
Right.
It's like a mental workout
That
can sharpen your brain and improve your ability to think and react and coordinate your movements.
Totally. And those benefits can actually translate to everyday life, too.
Right.
Helping you become more coordinated, more focused, more adaptable.
So whether you're a seasoned fencer or just thinking about trying it out, remember you're not just training your body, you're training your brain too.
And that's something pretty amazing.
To all our amazing fencing family listeners out there, keep up the amazing work.
Keep training, keep learning.
Keep exploring that amazing connection between your mind and body.
And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.
And those blades sharp.
That's it for this episode of Fencing Family.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of fencing.
And don't forget to check out Fencing Family on Etsy for all your fencing apparel and accessory needs.
They've got something for everyone in the family. Thanks for listening.